Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. I see that cream was the clear winner for how people like their coffee. We're going to get started this morning with our first poll. So, with our first real poll. The highest performing teams are most dependent on what? So please pull out your phones, go to that poll and answer it. And while you're doing that, we have a message from our presenting sponsor, Old National Bank.
How's the succession plan going?
Smooth, thanks to you. Dad ran a pretty tight ship.
And taught us to do the same. Best thing he did was bring Old National on board.
I'm just glad I could be there for your dad, and now for you guys.
There is so much I want to ask him right now, but I know that's not possible.
He's playing 18 today?
Yeah, he's teeing off right now, actually.
Boom.
Old National Wealth Management, where relationships and results matter. Old National. Get old.
All right, you thought we were going to get you, right? Make you pull out a Kleenex. Well, good morning. My name is Julie McDonough, and I'm so excited to be back as the host of the Good Leadership Breakfast. I'm the market president for the Minnesota market for Old National Bank, and we are thrilled to be the presenting sponsor of the Good Leadership Breakfast series. O&B is a sponsor because our leaders have seen personally what happens when you align teams, when you create clear accountabilities, when you reward people, and when you allow your leaders to bring the best versions of themselves to work every single day. Because when you do that and your employees feel good about being there, they feel valued, they're inspired, the real winners in that are our clients and the communities that we serve. And our brand. That's how we win. Some of you might remember I used to co-host this breakfast. For over 5 years, I partnered with Paul Batz. Took a little break through COVID, so I'm super excited and happy to be back. How many people are here for the first time today? Okay, that's a great showing of hands. Welcome. Welcome. You have joined a dynamic force of good leaders who are committed to improving the way their organizations perform because we know that goodness pays. Okay, so let's review a little bit what you can expect this morning. We're going to do some more polls. We're going to talk about the results of those. Everybody in the room is going to do the 7 F's wheel and complete that exercise. Paul Batz is going to introduce our guest speaker, Michele, and we'll get to hear from her. Everybody gets to participate in a workshop to help improve our team leadership skills. We're going to collect a significant amount of money to donate to a charity, and somebody in this audience is going to be up here on stage to pick the charity of their choice. It's what we call the bucket of goodwill, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. And we're all going to leave here inspired today to go back and be a little bit better and committed to our organizations and radiate goodness. So, before we get started, I have a sponsor, Rachel Mackey from Robert Half International. Rachel, would love to invite you up here and hear why you sponsor.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Like they said, my name is Rachel Mackey. I am a practice director at Robert Half in the marketing and creative division. Super thrilled to be here this morning with you guys, among other awesome leaders in the area. For those of you who don't know, Robert Half is the world's largest specialized talent solutions firm. We actually had the pleasure of hanging out with Paul all day yesterday, just learning more about the goodness culture with the leaders at Robert Half. So one of the many, many reasons why we sponsor this breakfast, being able to build strong teams, make great connections internally, externally. We love the Good Leadership Breakfast because it's an opportunity to build, foster, meet new leaders with the same mindset in the Twin Cities. So we definitely we're excited to continue this partnership with the Good Leadership Breakfast and just thrilled to be here this morning. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Rachel. One of the things that sets us apart is how we use data to support our belief that goodness pays. So with that, I'd like to introduce JC Lippold, one of 21 Good Leadership coaches, to take us to our next poll.
Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? It's officially fall outside, so don't miss it. It'll be gone tomorrow. Get your shovels ready. It's not a really good way to start making a snow joke in September, but good leadership. What is good leadership? It's an organizational effectiveness firm that is rooted in the idea that goodness pays. Right? We coach leaders to get better business results faster and easier. And we do this in two big ways. We team coach processes to align teams, right? So rather than leadership being unilateral, here's the leader, we look at teams as the unit that moves us forward. And we have development programs to increase leadership capabilities. So what is the driving vision for good leadership? It's that good leadership is going to outlive us. Right? That what we're doing today is going to have an impact on making tomorrow's a heck of a lot better. And that the companies who work with us will be winning in their market and unapologetically to their core, living out the belief that goodness pays. So for those of you who are here for the first time today, you're going to get to see what we mean. We're going to put the flesh on the bone for how goodness affects what we do. And one of the ways that we do that is by collecting data. So rather than goodness being this fluffy, figurative idea, we can go, here is how we see that goodness is doing the work that changes the way we do business. The highest performing teams are most dependent on what? Let's look at what we see in the room, right? The members of the team, 67%. The people in this room, that's our drive. The team leader, 19%. Strength of other teams in the organization, 13%. 2% outside factors. Here's where we see that goodness really pays. Leaders outside of this room, we collect data of leaders who are not living in this goodness lens. 55% of leaders who are not in this room think that it's an outside force who is driving high performance. Get this, 42% think it's the team leader. 11% think it's the other teams driving that organizational goodness. And then 5% like customer satisfaction. Only 45% think it's the members of the team. This is what it means to be in this room today. To go, how do we see things differently? So let's move on to our second poll question, which you will now, as we go back to the slide here. Go ahead and pull out your phone if you haven't already done so. Now you understand the importance of participating in these polls this morning. The question, high-performing teams are most dependent on what? Relational elements, building care personally and professionally within the teams that you're working with, or structural elements like building plans, solving problems, building clarity. Benny and the crew are going to provide us a little bit of answering the survey question music as you take the time. So before we show what inside this room thinks, here's the data of leaders polled outside of this room. 48% say relational elements. 52% say structural elements. You know, I always love Paul's answer to this. Paul always says, half the people in this room are going, duh, the answer is, and the other half of the room is going, duh, the answer is. And what we'll be talking about soon very much is that both of these things working together is where we find teams living out goodness within the business and within the lives that they do. Let's see what people in this room thought. 88% relational, 12% structural. What does that mean in this room today? We know that especially in a fight-flight culture, where change is happening faster, where we're getting more and more sensitive to how we do and why we do it, we know that most of the time the relational element is what's being missed. Businesses are putting their heads down and going, we need to focus on X and forget who we are working with. 88% of you are looking at what really allows a team to thrive as a team. We'll have one more poll question coming up later, but right now, we want to go ahead and provide you the opportunity to really look at how does goodness pay. Good leadership spent over 3 years of really heartfelt, head-focused research to go, what do we mean when we say how goodness pays? This isn't a question, right? How goodness pays, period, as opposed to does goodness pay? We know that it does. Paul Hillen wrote the book on it. And if right now these poll results are making you go, wow, that's kind of hit me weird, how what the room is saying is so different than what leaders outside this room are saying, we would love to give you a copy of this book if you are new to this good leadership model. So simply email your name, your address to info@goodleadership.com, and we'll send you a book next week. What you're going to get to see the rest of today is evidence-based action on how you change the way that you do business. And if you've been in this room a long time, you are one of those voices that is showing the world that goodness truly does pay. I'll be back a little bit later with another poll question and then a little bit of workshop time for you to work later. Back to Julie.
All right. Thanks, JC. Interesting results up there. I think it says a lot about the people in this room and what we value and what brought us here together today. Okay, this is time for one of our favorite rituals of the Good Leadership Breakfast. If you go to your favorite local hardware store, this is Mark Bergman's invention, and it's called the Handy Paint Pail. Here we call it the Bucket of Goodwill. And so this gives us a chance this morning to practice our own generosity and our own aspirational thinking. I'm going to ask you to think about how fortunate you are to be here today and dig deep in your purse or your wallet. Now, being a banker, I have a lot of creative payment methods that you can use. So you can throw some cash in here, you can write a check, you can scan the QR code, do it online. We'll take an IOU. I might want to pull credit, but we'll take those too. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. While you're doing it, I want you to know that Mark Bergman and his generous spirit matches the donations that go in here. At the end, we're going to have Michele pull one of your business cards, so put that in there with your donation. We'll bring you up here on stage, and you get to donate all that money to the charity of your choice. So while you're doing this at your table, think about where that money would go and share that with your teammates. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Now it's time for me to introduce the creator of the Good Leadership Breakfast. He's an informed optimist, a contrarian who pushes back against the bad news bias in the media, and a thought leader on organizational effectiveness. He's a role model for how goodness pays. Please welcome me in joining to the stage Paul Batz, the founder and CEO of Good Leadership.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you.
Let's give it up for Benny Weinbeck Trio. How about the, anyone who knows anything about jazz musicians understands what an incredible thing it is that they're here in the morning on a Friday, right? Yeah, I've got some fun news. Since the last time I saw you, Melinda and I became grandparents for the 3rd time. Yeah. This is Eliza. Her last name also is Batz, and today she's 9 weeks old. Yeah, so it just reminds me of life. It just goes so fast and also just keeps getting better. So we're grateful to be able to share that news with you. It's kind of an out-of-body experience for me when I hear Julie and JC say that we've been doing this now for the 104th time. Yeah, we really did start this breakfast in January of 2010. The economy was terrible. There are a bunch of business owners whose spirits were really bruised and broken, and we invited them to come and have a discussion about the conversation, do you still believe goodness pays? It was an overwhelming meeting. We never intended to do even 2. And they said, we got to do this again. And so in that time period, we kept it going, even through COVID. Many of you encouraged us, and many of you watched that meeting we did with one iPhone over Facebook Live that first time. That's the most nervous I've ever been in my entire life. But here we are today because people keep showing up. The sponsors keep saying, what's next? And we've been now evaluating the trends we've seen over what's going to be soon 14 years of doing this. So November 1st of this year is 14 years for Good Leadership. And so there's one trend I want to talk about today. in that we've seen organizations change largely because of the employees that are entering in, what their expectations are. About 15 years ago, most organizations were run with a traditional culture. It was hierarchical. They drew lots and lots of org charts. The power was condensed in a small group of people. There was a chain of command, and accountability was pretty simple because it was rules-based. And it seemed like that was a simple way to run a business. A lot of founder-owned companies are still that way, and some big ones are still run this way. But we work with everybody in the middle, and what we've seen is a really rapid shift to what we're labeling as a goodness culture, where people enter in with the expectation of collaboration, power is distributed, where there are teams of teams that are supposed to work together to deliver what's expected, and accountability is not a rules-based concept. It comes from shared commitments that you and I negotiate together. This is the context by which we see our clients thriving. But one of the most interesting parts about it is some of the teaching and a lot of the tools we use in our industry are still designed for the left-hand side of the slide. So we're dedicated to make these things move over to the right-hand side, and the teams of teams concept is really, really important. You're going to hear more and more and more about this as we go forward. So the last session that we did, that started in the spring, we did March, April, and May. We had 3 fabulous speakers, and we collected all the research that we did, and along with some interviews with some of our clients, and produced this thing. It's a DIY paper. Most people work on organizational effectiveness by themselves. We just thought we would distribute the intellectual property to make it easier for you. We emailed this to everyone who was at the spring series, but if you weren't there, just send me an email right now, Paul at Good Leadership. I know you're using your phones today, and we'll send this to you, and we'll make it available, because that's part of our mission. You know, we want to make this idea of goodness grow in everybody's organization so that you all thrive together. One of the reasons why we focused on that has a lot to do with, we focused, probably the most important thing about this paper is that we expound on these 3 ideas. If you're going to move to a goodness culture, there are 3 things that we as coaches make sure happen in your organization. The first thing is this. We need more than an intuitive system to understand that the teams at the top are aligned. Because every employee will tell you when the teams at the top are not aligned, everyone and everything suffers. What we've experienced is that when we do survey teams at the top, we roughly get about 54 to 60% of the people who are running the teams at the top are actually aligned with what the CEO expects. That's not that many. And so it's important that you come up with some sort of a process to figure that out. The second thing is if you're expecting teams of teams, we need to teach the same teaming methodology so that everybody's understanding how these teams are supposed to operate. Research we've done in the past talks about the fact that most VP or director level people have about 11 teams that they're on over the period of a month. And they report whiplash when they go to your meeting and then to your meeting and then to your meeting. And that's important that we deal with this. And then the third thing is we need to be intellectually honest about the really key players in the organization. We call them mission critical roles. And employees will tell you right away whether or not they think you have an A player in those roles. So, have a process for aligning the teams at the top. Make sure you're teaching the same teaming methodology, and then also be intellectually honest. Do you have industry A players in the most important roles? The reason we're focusing on this goes back to the original research of the How Goodness Pays book. We identified these 5 factors that organizations have alive when goodness pays financially. The concept number 3 is the one that has the highest financial value. A team-based culture. And the opposite of that is that people only get paid for delivering individually. So we decided that we really needed to dive deeper into this. And on your tables today in the center, and it's okay right now to just go reach out and grab one, we have books called Good Leadership is a Team Sport. We have one for each of you. This is the second time we've introduced this book because about a year ago, we gave them out at the breakfast, and we've been using them in our coaching practice, and this book sold out, the first printing, faster than any other book that we've done. So you'll see on the top it says second printing. this copy is for you. And we're interested to find out how you might use this back in your organization. What I'd like to do right now is to invite JC back up to ask another poll question. And then the exercises we're going to talk about later in the program here directly relate to what's been written about and the research that's in the Good Leadership as a Team Sport book. JC?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. So you can see the question on the screen. To what extent are managers in your organization using the same team model? 3 options. We don't have a same team model. Number 2, some. Number 3, all. ABC. Benny, a little poll music, and we'll look at the data in just a moment. So we've gotten in the routine of looking outside of the room and then in the room. 20%, 1 in 5 organizations say we don't have,
you have a slide on
a team model. Yep, so, we do. There we go.
There you go.
We don't have that team model. 33% say, hey, we're doing it. We're all within the same team methodology. And half, to Paul's point, are using some the model, some the other, which of course is creating that disalignment at the top. That's what we see in the room. 46%, we don't have a common team model. 43, some using, and 10%, we are all aligned. The cool thing about what happens today is it directly affects what happens in the room afterwards. There's a great amount of speaking the truth quickly within saying 46% of you don't see a similar team model within the organizations that you're in. And you can probably attach some stumbling blocks that are showing up within your day-to-day to work, within where you're going together. Paul, what do you see here?
Well, it's directly related to the signature story in the book and what it is we're focusing on most often now inside new client engagements. The signature story here is all about a woman who grew up in the Midwest and moved to the East Coast to go to an Ivy League school and got a fantastic job at a company you've heard of. She was very, very successful and then was recruited back to run the company in her hometown where she interned in college. And a very successful legacy company. Everybody in town knew this company for sure. And what she identified when she got back was a culture that was very unfamiliar to her. The signature story is called "This is Beautiful" because it started out for her as a disaster. What she learned was this organization was a very familial culture. They refer to themselves as a family. They didn't like role clarity. They were completely allergic to big goals, and they really didn't like accountability. Okay, so we've been talking about these concepts here in inside the book here, and the concept that we're talking about today is this thing we call epoxy theory. And we talked about that earlier. We asked you about the relational components of teams and the structural components of teams. We've proven with our research that you need to have equal amounts of both. So what we're learning, just like in this room, people were expecting a very relational, warm, kind of fuzzy type of leader. This woman was not that. She was very much a structural leader. And what she found were she had very high expectations for how they would work together. She had very high expectations about accountability, and she ran into significant resistance. So we introduced this concept of being 50% relational and 50% structural. So we all know epoxy are 2 chemicals that do absolutely nothing by themselves, but you put them together and it creates a really strong bond. That's how we think about teaming. And what was interesting about this exercise is that she discovered a totally different way to lead her team through this exercise we've done with you many times before. And I'm going to introduce it right now. So inside your table handout is the 7 F's wheel. Those of you who are new to us, this concept may be new to you. But I'm going to ask you, please, if you've done this 50 times before, please do it again. So this is a technique that really cultivates the relational side of leadership. The theory here is if you're a relational leader, you develop a sense of care and concern for everybody around the table in which they want to invest in each other's lives. What she learned is these people knew each other, they knew their kids and their families and how they grew up, but they knew nothing about their hopes and their dreams and how they saw themselves through the lens of the 7F's wheel. So the 7F's you can see there alphabetically are faith, family, finances, fitness, friends, fun, and future. They're organized alphabetically because any other way would be political. Okay? So we're starting with faith, and I want you to do this exercise. I'm going to read it out loud. If you've never done it before, watch the person next to you who maybe has. I'm going to ask my friend Benny to give us some 7F's music. Once you've completed it, then just do the kindergarten exercise and connect the dots, okay? Then turn to the person next to you and just talk about it for 30 seconds. So here we go. Faith, family, finances, fitness, friends, fun, and future. Circle the number 10 if you're fully satisfied, 1 if it's completely unsatisfying. Benny, go ahead with the music, please. This is where I say there are many things about this breakfast that are unsatisfying. We just got you started on an important conversation, and then I'm just going to interrupt it. The point of putting this exercise here is that in a shared commitment, collaboration-based teams of teams culture, people negotiate accountability with people that they know and understand. And when you can create the climate to have an honest conversation about what's going on in your life as measured by the 7F's and what are your aspirations and what can we as a team help you on, accountability becomes much, much easier because you know who these people are and what they're working on, both at work and outside of work. The end of this story in the book is that the reason why this woman named Adriana wrote "This is beautiful" on the top of her notepad in the 3rd session is that the team actually kind of learned to lean in and become not only family, but invest in one another's lives. They introduced the Team Momentum Survey, which is a part of the book, and you'll get a chance to see something about it here in a second. And they started to embrace this concept called healthy tension. What they had before was harmony. And they learned that harmony was actually getting in the way of their high performance. They were not being honest with each other. They weren't speaking up. They did not believe that all news was good news in their team, and they were failing. And it took a structural leader to come in and break through that harmony to get them to talk about the right things to turn it around. It didn't take very long. And it was the 7F's wheel that unlocked it. I'm really grateful to our friends at Irish Titan, who are the sponsors for the 7F's wheel. I know they use this in their organization, and Darren Lynch, the CEO, is here today. And, you know, this tool is yours. You can use it however you wish. You know how to get a hold of us, Paul at Good Leadership or info at Good Leadership, and we'll send you a PDF that you can use in your organization. So now here's an abrupt transition. I want to introduce you to a good leader that I just adore. She came and joined us from Los Angeles. She was labeled as one of the 40 under 40 in LA. Now that's something, because you know how big LA is, right? It's a big deal here, but it's a really, really big deal there. She is the president of the Western region of Northern Trust, and she's going through an MBA program at Harvard. What I know is that she's an absolutely wonderful family person. She's a fabulous mom. She has a 16-year-old girl and 14-year-old boy. Is that right? Here's a picture of her right there with Justin Thomas. You know, there used to be this thing called the Northern Trust Open. That meant she got to play golf with the swankiest PGA pros. And then she lives in a fabulous part of LA and enjoys the beach club in Santa Monica. Please join me in welcoming Michele Havens. Awesome, yeah, come on and join us. Well, Michele, this is your first Good Leadership Breakfast, and you brought a friend, too. You want to introduce your friend?
Yeah, that's Amy Tellup over at the table there. Amy and I were college roommates at BC, and she lives here in Minnesota. And thanks to you, this is my first time visiting. So while I'm ashamed of that, I'm delighted to be here. It's long overdue, so
That's
welcome.
okay. We're happy to have you here. So when you hear the words, Good Leadership is a Team Sport, the title of the series and on the book, what comes to mind for you?
Good leadership is a team sport. I grew up on the East Coast in Boston and was surrounded by great sports teams. I remember listening to the Red Sox on the radio. That's how old I am. And I enjoyed playing field hockey and softball in high school and wasn't particularly good at softball. So I actually did the book. In the old days, you used to write like fly out, position 5.
You kept score, but that's amazing.
Yeah, and so for me, I learned pretty early on that you can play a lot of different roles on a team and be incredibly valuable, and sometimes, learn more by sitting on the bench. So
you're not an LA girl.
No.
Wow.
I've been there now on the West Coast for 23 years, but Boston was pretty influential in my life.
So what were some of your pivot points, the big points that got you from where you were to where you're at now?
Well, I was the first person in my family to go to college, so heading off to BC was a pretty big deal. I knew I didn't want to go too far away from home. We had to be practical. I wasn't getting on a plane to go to USC or, So a pivot point for me was actually after I got my first job with JP Morgan on Wall Street, and they came to me and asked if I would do an international rotation as a function of this program that I was a part of, Wall Street training program. And I remember thinking to myself, I didn't even have a passport. And then going back to BC, I was actually afraid, and this is how small my world was, that I was gonna miss out on football season. And so going back to teams, it was like, oh my God, I'm gonna go in the fall? That timing doesn't work for me. And so, it was one of those moments where I stepped back and reflected on how blessed I was to be asked to literally move to Milan for a year, not knowing the language, different from study abroad where there's a residency. I was gonna be living on my own, and that was obviously a life-changing moment where I just realized that I could truly go anywhere in the world by myself with a foreign language before cell phones and figure it out. Wow. And so that is just the beginning of this theme around pivot points where I've learned that when you say yes, generally speaking, there's goodness on the other side.
So you did a study abroad at Milan. You came back to the States, then what happened? What was another pivot point after that?
I met my husband when I returned back to New York, and he was asked to relocate to Los Angeles for work. And in the spirit of saying yes, he asked me to marry him, because I did say, if you think I'm moving halfway across the country without a ring on my finger, you're crazy.
Yeah, well, we did talk about Beyonce last night,
right,
didn't we?
We did,
yes.
So that was certainly meaningful. I walked into the Northern Trust office with my Talbot's navy blue suit in 2000, in the beginning of the tech bubble bursting. And I walked into the Northern Trust office and I said, I'm looking for a job in investments. And I left my resume with the receptionist, and the next day I got a phone call back. And I've been there 23 years since, so that was certainly a meaningful pivot point.
And so will you tell us a little bit about the scope of your job today?
Sure, so today I oversee 19 offices, 16 markets across the West Coast for us, with headquarters in Chicago. That's basically Washington State to Texas, so Texas is the West region at Northern. And I have a wealth management practice for the ultra high net worth clients where we provide comprehensive advisory and investment solutions, wealth management, banking services as well.
So a lot of different variations in states, and there's a big difference between Oregon and Texas. Yeah, so how do you deal with some of the variations and just the basic cultural thoughts about wealth and things like that?
Well, certainly teams of teams is a concept that I can relate to because we're very entrepreneurial as I think about it. We've got this incredible institution with a robust history, and yet we've got these communities that all have unique characteristics associated with them. And so it's really important to meet people where they're at, both on a local level and then kind of making sure there's some consistency in how we deliver that client experience. And so a lot of the tools that we talk about, Paul, are instrumental in helping us be successful in doing that.
I'm curious to find out when you felt like you learned how to be a good team member and also a team leader. I know obviously your sports background, but then you can translate that into the business world. So can you give us a sort of a sports example and then a business example as well?
Of how I became a good...
Yeah, how you learned how to be a good team leader.
Well, I probably, actually, funny enough, fall back a little bit on Derek Jeter and the New York Yankees. My husband's a New York fan. I know, funny, right? Like the Boston fan pulling out the Yankees metaphor, but...
Yeah, you're killing us around here.
Right,
You've already talked about Boston and New York.
Sports,
I know,
right.
I mean,
so
geez.
I just always felt, and Tom Brady in the same way, if you're going to pull, I was going to see how long I could go without talking about him.
There you go, there you go.
No, but in all seriousness, being that coach and the, more importantly, captain in the field, and I like to say there's nothing I wouldn't ask my people to do that I wouldn't do myself. And so particularly what I didn't tell you about was after I got my MBA, Northern asked me to move to Seattle, and that was my first real leadership opportunity. It happened to also head into the financial crisis. And I was a pretty junior person relative to the experienced people that I was managing. And so it was a perfect example of a time where you had to basically demonstrate that you weren't structurally operating in a place that wasn't side by side, knowing that it was as important for me to be picking up the phone, calling clients, as it was to be asking all of them to do that. So that was a moment where I remember, we all had CNBC on watching, wondering how low the markets could actually go, and bracing our chairs and keeping people in their seats, literally, so that they weren't just selling out, because ultimately, that was the worst thing they could do. So by literally picking up the phone and being the first one in and the last one to leave, I was there for people in an attempt to understand where they were coming from, right? So when you talk about that relational capital, you learn a lot about people in a crisis, and that was one of the first ones for me in a formal leadership role.
So obviously we know the market's returned, things got very prosperous for a long time, your career grew, now you're working out of this fabulous office in LA. You got these teams all over the place. What are some of the few things that you expect in terms of consistency with all these different teams?
Well, thanks to your leadership, we've talked about having a collective vision. And so internally, we think about a desire to grow. Culturally, we're really service-oriented, and ultimately, we cherish the fact that we wouldn't do anything that would be on the other side of our clients' interests, right? Having fun is something that I've always valued, so we try and bring fresh ideas and experiment, and with that comes embracing failure, because when you risk doing something different, inevitably it can flop, right? I was cackling because I've heard a little bit about the Old National commercials, and I thought that was hilarious, right? But, there's always a risk in doing something fresh and innovative, especially in a baking business that's 135 years old. And then we're highly regulated, and we've got, shareholders we've got to be thoughtful about. So it's particularly interesting to manage growth and have fun when you can't hire every person that you think would be great immediately, because you've got to think about the economics of the business and the growth rate. So those are sort of three key elements of how we try to create a common vision statement to be the fastest growing, most exciting, most financially compelling wealth management business. So
yeah, and it's working.
We're doing pretty well at it,
yeah. You are. So I want to go way back to when you were in middle school. You told me an awesome story about your fascination with Anthony Robbins.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yes.
tell us about that, would you?
Okay.
It's a wonderful story.
So I watched an infomercial once and ended up with Awaken the Giant Within CD set. And if you want to laugh, because it's true, I actually have moved probably 3 or 4 times, and I still have those CDs. I don't even know if I have a CD player, but like, if you were to have like your box of things that you recall were part of your defining moments, I've always been a consumer of positivity, and I've always had a growth mindset. So learning, getting better, having plans, measuring goals. I was doing that as early as I can remember, truly. And so I've tried to bring that into elements of my life, although I've found that it's refined through time. But yeah, Tony Robbins and the Waking the Giant Within was one of my early childhood.
Well, he's obviously successful because his
story,
followers are
so-
successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was never going to forget that story, mate.
Yeah.
No. Well, let's dive into the success habits that we have been told from your team that you're really good at. So as part of our process for helping our speakers get ready, we feel compelled to give them as much back as they give us. And so our team calls some people that Michele nominates, and we ask them a bunch of questions to figure out what are the success habits they see from Michele. And one of the ways we figure that out is we ask them the question, okay, if you have a job tomorrow where you're on your own, you've got to build a really good team, what have you learned from Michele that you're going to do over and over again because you know what really works? And so here's what they told us. The first thing, you use interpersonal connectivity to create buy-in for things that people may not like. And I will say that, this is a very relational concept, going back to what we talked about in epoxy. But I know you well to know that you're a very structural leader. So how do you do this, and why is it important to you?
It goes back to that earlier concept that I mentioned, which is basically don't ask your people to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And so one of the things that we talk about is it's not enough to learn 1 new thing a day right now. You've got to learn 2 to 3 new things. I know in our business, we're constantly providing additional tools and resources to people. Fraud prevention, cybersecurity are themes we have to weave into our quarterly updates with clients. And so for me, it comes down to, what am I asking them to do, and wouldn't I do it myself? We're fortunate to have a business with clients we've had for many, many years, and you're all watching inflation, and trying to retain talent, everybody wants a raise, right? So we've had to take a look at some long relationships that we've had that have been at relative discounts to our current fee schedules. And so I will basically demonstrate to my team how I have that conversation of the value proposition that we deliver to our clients, and then ask them to do the same. But that's just one example of, it's uncomfortable and I don't like it. Some folks are client service oriented, and they don't necessarily want to be external in the same way that I enjoy, right? So trying to find ways to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, that means you got to take the time to really get to know these people and understand, what's important to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good. That's excellent. The second one is surround yourself with strong people who provide straight talk and then listen. Now, I love coaching people that grew up on the East Coast because straight talk is a lot easier than it is here. Okay, so you surround yourself and then you listen to them. Talk about this for a little bit. How do you do this?
So it's fun because Pat Mahoney is here today from Northern Trust in Minnesota as well as our guest. And we just met in person yesterday, and we were having this very conversation. To your point, being an East Coaster, frankly, I've had to tone down my straight talk. It's actually been one of those things that can be an Achilles heel. Like, I don't know how to do anything but the truth. Like, I could tell you a story. I turned myself in 6th grade for cheating on a vocabulary test. True story. I told my kids, right, like my failure, and I served detention, right? But I couldn't harness the guilt of knowing that I had done something wrong. So I'm a straight shooter. And integrity is really important to everything that we do. But you all know when you take on leadership roles, there are people who want to be your champion, and they're going to give you the props to feel good about how you did. And then there's somebody, if you listen closely, who's going to give you some feedback. And if you run a culture of a growth mindset, you're going to get that. And so there was an exercise that we do in our offices that you might be interested in knowing about, where at the end of a meeting, whether it's with a client or an internal meeting, we'll go around the table and rate the meeting on a scale of 1 to 5. And so say someone says the meeting's a 3.5. The next question is, for you, what's the difference between a 3.5 and a 5? And so it starts about the meeting, and then it translates into your individual performance. So if I would evaluate myself as a 2.5, how would you reciprocate that? And so you figure out like who your truth tellers are, that's what we call them. And ultimately, for me, I find them more valuable than the cheerleaders because sometimes you want to know what you don't see, and those are the people that are going to tell you what you really need to hear. And you know, you have to be comfortable when they deliver it, and you don't always have to agree, right? I mean, you and I have had that conversation too, but you do have to praise it and also recognize that if you don't, they won't give it to you again. And it's a gift. It's like feedback, right?
Yeah, that's one of the success habits in the book, and also this idea that all news is good news. All news is good news. That's a hard one around here. In the Midwest, especially Minnesota nice, that's a tough one. Okay, so the third one is tie everyone's work back to the team's top priorities. So how do you go about doing this?
So I mentioned we have the 19 offices, and they're all run a little bit differently depending on the personality of the leader. Ultimately, we go back to our common mission statement, but when we talk about what we value, having fun is part of it. So I've told this story, but in this expense environment, rather than get my top 45 leaders together in the third quarter, we made a decision that we had to translate to a virtual format for our offsite. And one of my truth tellers said to me, I've got an idea. Why don't we talk about our brands? And we'll talk about the brands of each individual because we want them to have more swagger. Northern Trust can appreciate the Minnesota nice. And to have conviction in what we do to differentiate ourselves and to be confident projecting that. And so what we did was recognizing that some of that is a shift in the way people think. It's change and evolution. It's fresh. We said, well, one of the big things that's gone on this summer is a representation of strong women who have continued to evolve and be relevant. And so we said, fantastic, let's take Barbie, Beyonce, and Taylor Swift and ask everyone on my leadership team to pick the one that they can relate to the most. And we took, you know, instead of the Northern Trust background for your virtual screen, we pulled some pictures. I mean, we had folks sitting in the Barbie car with Ryan Gosling, and it was super cute. And then everybody got to kind of use a little bit of fun to sort of tell their story, to think about who they want to be relative to who they are, and to use those three examples that are billionaire women in the summertime here in America as great representatives of change, evolution, connecting with their audiences. Like the lessons you could pull from that just kept going on, and it was super fun. So how do I tie Barbie and Beyonce to Northern Trust? There you have it. I can tie anything to work and top priorities.
I think we're going to steal that one.
Yeah. It was fun. I got a great picture of it.
Yeah, JC, now you know what your exercise is when you get here. I'll just say one more thing about this, and then JC, come on up. This set of success habits, this is extraordinary. I mean, we coach hundreds of team leaders, and the fact that it's well balanced around interpersonal connectivity, there's structure all over this place, but you know, surrounding yourself with strong people, that's that A players and mission critical roles thing. This stuff seems, over and over again we discover the most common sense things are the most difficult. So it's extraordinary that we learned this, and I hope it was a gift for you to see this back from your people.
It is certainly a gift. It's always great to know more about what you do well and what you need to work on. So thank you.
Excellent. So JC, you've got some workshops related to team leadership.
Yeah, but I want to ask really quick. So scorebook keeper on the softball team. I was the worst person on the tennis team who was put on the team because the coach knew I made everybody work harder. Anybody else that person on your team? Do you have that story of being the person? All of these success habits, Michele, speak out of that lens. How do we provide the importance for these people to see how they affect this? So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's your time to go ahead and do this work. You know, when we were doing the 7Fs, Aaron said, you know, Aaron who does 7Fs 17,000 times, you know, a year, said it always changes. So looking at what may sound like, oh, here's the thing I need to do, let's put some of these things into action. Your 2 exercises today for our workshop time, you're gonna have about 10 minutes. It's gonna jump into the epoxy theory. And it's going to talk into looking at different kinds of teams. So in your handout, in the little book, there's 2 more pieces of paper. First one says, My Team Leadership Planning Tool. 3 simple steps. Number 1, look at the 6 elements in the team momentum circle And go ahead and rank them. Number one being your, this is my greatest area of strength, all the way down to this is my least area of strength. You're gonna see they're kind of added into a structural or relational category. Second question, on the left there, circle, are you the style of team leadership which describes your strength? Is it more relational? Is it more structural? And then lastly, which of these 6 elements do you need to focus on more? Do you need to flex more in order to bring your team into that direction of growth and goodness? Spend some time there. Second exercise, that second page, is going to encourage you to think about different types of teams, and then whether they operate more independently, let's say like a tennis team, or maybe more interdependently like a softball team. So go ahead and follow the instructions on the top there. And then after you do these exercises on your own, a couple questions for you to consider in conversation at your table. First one, when you assess relational or structural, how accurately did that fit your self-perception? In other words, when you look at how you rank these things, are you actually seeing yourself accurately? And speak about you and your team amongst other people at your table on their team. Second question, what's one thing that you can do differently today to help you become more balanced in your team leadership approach? So take some time, work on it individually, and then open up that conversation with people at your table. You'll have about 10 minutes. Benny's going to provide some music. I'll go ahead and chime on in if anyone has any questions. All right, time for some workshop. Well, Benny and friends knew that we were all feeling groovy, so thanks for the tune. And again, it's always slightly unnourishing to go ahead and have to stop a conversation like this. So consider maybe when you're going to consider this conversation later. Let's go and check on it. Think about that strength that you're like, hey, I am definitely more structurally focused on my strength or more relationally structured. Raise your hand if you are more structurally, you arrived at being more structural. Cool, counting, got it. Okay, hands down. Who is more relational? Awesome. The one thing I will notice with the 80 to 20 prior, I think a little bit of getting to rest and digest in this space is maybe more like 70 and 30. And as we know within this conversation, we need both to make that magic come to life. So, one more little touch point. Craig, what are you going to focus on to grow your strength out of those 6 elements from the first exercise?
Well, considering my first 4 are structural, I think relational would be a good place to start. And shared commitments.
Cool. If you couldn't hear Craig said my first 4 were structural. Structural. So all of a sudden it's like, I'm going to focus on shared commitments and the relational side. You will see your patterns. You will see how your data plays out. Do not underestimate that goodness has pathways to amplify it. And often that is in conversations like this where we find that. Thanks, everybody.
Well, it should be no shocker that the relationals like networking events better. Yeah, so we did a 7F's wheel exercise many years ago, and we've continued them, and you do it on a regular basis, and you have a 7F's wheel story that I asked you to share. Would you please share it now?
Sure. So some of you may have seen my headshot for the March breakfast. And we had committed to doing that probably 6 months in advance of the schedule. And I looked at the calendar and I said, great, my friend's in Minnesota, I'm going to come spend the weekend. And then as we got a little bit closer, it turned out that my daughter's 16th birthday was the following Tuesday. And, you know, sweet 16s apparently are incredibly important, Mom. And so, you know, there were weekends on both ends, and I thought, well, this, you know, it's a Tuesday, like, we'll celebrate your birthday. And she was not having it. So at the end of the day, I realized that my wheel was not going to roll if I came out here to do it in March. So thank you, Paul, for understanding. And it was funny because we actually had a lot of discussion about what the event was going to be when there had been nothing planned yet. And she chose not to have the big party for a variety of reasons. and we ended up going to see Taylor Swift in Las Vegas. So I would tell you we made the right choice. But thank you all for understanding and your flexibility, the good leadership team for pivoting and having me here in September. But it was awesome to call Paul and be like, my wheel won't roll. And he understood exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So you can probably, if you do it often enough, Erin, in your office, use that at some point. Like, sorry.
Yeah. Well, if we're not flexible, we're nothing, so there you go. Well, so this is the question we've been asking every speaker for about 10 years. So help us with a proof statement. How do you know for sure that goodness pays for you in your leadership?
We hired you, Paul.
Ah, there you go. Mm-hmm.
Well, 4.5 years ago, I took my boss's position running the West region. And there's a great photo on my desk today of the 14 top leaders in the West at that time. And it was taken in Chicago at our headquarters, and it was celebratory. And I'm in the middle of it, and he thought it'd be really cute if everybody was pointing at me. Well, 4.5 years later, it feels like a photo from Back to the Future, because people have been retiring, they've been promoted internally. Some of them have moved on to other opportunities. And of the 14 people, there's only me and one other still in that picture. And so in the course of 4.5 years in this environment, which has been lots of change for all of us, I've had to identify talent and promote from within and hire new people. And I know for sure that goodness pays, and I'm doing something to balance structural and relational, because I was able to take a 2-week vacation this summer for the first time in that 4.5 years and feel like I was truly disconnected from work so that I could recharge and empower the talent that we've got. Assume good intent. They might not do everything the way I would do it, but that's the power of giving people space to think independently and to grow themselves. So for me, that's how goodness pays.
Thank you. It's been awesome to get to know you even better. And let's give it up for Michele Havens.
Thank you.
So now it's time to welcome Julie back to the stage.
All right, Michele, thank you so much.
You.
I really appreciated the specific examples you gave when talking about your success habits. I think that helps bring those concepts to life for those of us to think about how we go back and apply that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Old National Bank would like to donate $1,000 to the charity of your choice as a thank you for being here today. Will you tell us where that's going and why?
Sure. So I chose Determined to Succeed. This is a program based in Los Angeles, and it's targeting first-generation children who have aspirations of going off to college. And so as someone who is first-generation, it's particularly near and dear to my heart, but it's certainly one of the ways that I think we all can pay it forward to create brighter and better futures for all young people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You get to draw a name.
Okay. Okay. Linda Redding.
Oh, here's Linda up here. Come on up here.
All right, Linda, come on up.
Awesome.
There you go. Keep the music flowing, Benny.
Hi, Linda. Welcome. Why don't you step up here?
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you work?
I work for United Healthcare. I'm a program manager over there after many years in healthcare and looking to retire soon.
Awesome. Okay, well, I am excited to share that we raised $1,481 today with the match $2,962, almost $3,000, going to the charity of your choice. Tell us where that is.
Okay, and I think most of you will know where this is. Gustavus Women in Leadership, I'm the board president. And so this is an organization that helps young women in their develop their leadership skills and alumni as well. So that'll be put to good use, whether it's scholarships or training or whatever. So we're excited.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Thank you very much, Linda. Absolutely. Yeah, let's give it up for Michele one more time.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, awesome. Well, we just love the fact that we can dive in and look for success habits with these leaders who've demonstrated amazing things. I'm just going to summarize again what we learned from Michele, and hopefully you can take some notes about this as well. We know that we're willing to make changes and do things we might not want to if we believe it's in our own best interest. When we connect with people interpersonally, it's easier to get them to make the kind of changes that we have to make in organizations that thrive. Second, surround yourself with strong people who are going to provide straight talk, even in Minnesota. You know what? And then let's listen to them. I love the technique of evaluating the meeting. That's one of the success habits that's in the back of the book. And then tie everybody's work to the team's top priorities. This is way harder than it sounds. This is the number one thing we run into. When we ask people, what are the top 3 priorities of the team? Everybody tells us what their individual priorities are. It takes a really strong team leader who's focused and disciplined to keep the top priorities front and center no matter what's going on in the business. So thank you very much. Those are awesome reminders, and you met the source right here. Next month, we're continuing this conversation about teams of teams. We have an absolutely phenomenal fundraiser. She works with the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. Her name is Mayanne Tran. And she's outstanding, a magnetic personality, very much like Michele. We hope to see you here in October. We're going to ask her a lot of the same questions. We're mining her success habits, and we'll be building on the data that we chose for the team book. Now, here's where I'm going to ask you to help me. I'm at a part of my career where I spend almost all of my time with CEOs, and we're noticing that the expectation gap between how much boards and shareholders are expecting CEOs to get up to speed in the job. So in other words, mainly they think you should probably be up to speed in, maybe 10 weeks. Whereas CEOs are telling us a very different story than that. And so if you feel compelled to be a part of this, once a year we're going to publish a research report about what we're learning. And I would love to meet a CEO you think is a really good leader or somebody that you report to. And so you know how to get a hold of me, Paul at Good Leadership. We're going to keep asking. And so if you think that's a good idea, I'd love to know it. The Good Leadership of the Team Sport book is on your table. Go ahead and take them. There's no reason why we should take any back to the office. It's our gift to you. We believe in generosity, and we want to spur better team leadership in you and the people that you work for. We talked about how consistency in teaming methodology is important. We've not seen a single organization who invested in this that got worse. Now, and if you want to just sample it yourself before you go any deeper, we've got a book bundle. You can buy 10 books plus a study guide, and it's out there on the website, and it's easy to find. So what I'd like to do here is to close by just reminding you that what we talked about today is the subject of teamwork. Nothing significant has ever happened alone, which means if you're trying to do something important and big, you have to get other people to play together. We think good leadership is a team sport. We confirmed it with the research in the Goodness Pays. The third concept of the 5 Goodness Pays factors is you have to have a team-based culture to thrive today. But we're learning that most people have never even had any training on how to run a high-performing team. If you can create consistency in your organization of how all teams are working, you will see a financial boost. We can guarantee it. We introduced the concepts of epoxy theory, which means you need to have a structural mindset to set the team up to succeed, but you also need to invest in people's success. I'm going to follow up with you, Craig. This is something we can talk about, right? So, as we send you home today, we're going to go back to the very simplest concept ever. We believe the highest compliment for any good leader is you radiate goodness. So if you've been here before, you know what I'm going to say now. Are you ready to radiate goodness today? Yes. Okay, we're going to do it one more time. Are you ready to radiate goodness today? Yes. Thank you very much. We hope to see you in October. Goodbye.